Hey there everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about publishing too soon or trying to publish too soon and how that can be damaging to your psyche and to your career. This is something I want to talk about because it's something that I've been seeing a lot lately, especially with the rise in self-publishing and the fact that self-publishing no longer has such negative connotations anymore, since self-publishing is starting to become respected as a form of publishing now that people don't think it's just for people who are writing really shitty romance novels that are, it's the first draft, unedited, just being put out onto the internet. Now it's being seen as, oh, people are taking the necessary steps to get their novels professionally edited, and these books that are coming out via self-publishing are actually really good. Now that that's kind of shifting and people are promoting self-publishing as a form of publishing, they're saying, hey, don't traditionally publish, self-publish. Because all of that is happening, now I am seeing a lot of people publishing or trying to publish too soon. Though I will say this isn't only a self-publishing phenomenon, it's just that I've seen a rise in it since self-publishing has become a more viable option for publishing. So then there's two things specifically that I want to talk about today. The first is how publishing or trying to publish too soon can damage your psyche and your career. And then also, how do you know if you're publishing too soon? Like, how do you know? But let's start out with how it can be damaging, because I feel like it's important to really get it across to you guys why you don't want to be publishing or trying to publish too soon. Like, what's going to happen if that does come to pass? Why will that negatively affect you? So let's first talk about the emotional and psychological impacts of publishing too soon or trying to publish too soon. The thing I've seen the most, and the thing that really motivated me to make this video, is the blow to authors' self-confidence when they publish too soon or try to publish too soon. Because if you put your book out there and it is received negatively for one reason or another, whether it's because the book wasn't ready or because you weren't ready, and you get a lot of negative criticism leveled at you or at the book, and you're not ready to handle that, it is going to absolutely destroy your self-confidence. You are no longer going to feel like you are a good writer or like you can write or know how to write. You are going to question everything about yourself. And it's something that I've been seeing a lot of lately, is people whose books are received negatively and then they're like, I'm never going to write again, because obviously I didn't know what I was doing and I failed and I'm not a good writer and I should have never been writing in the first place. And that's a horrible thing that you never want to see, is people who have so many stories inside of them and who have a love of storytelling deciding that because of this one negative experience they're never going to write again. It's sad, and I don't want it to happen to you guys. And this can also happen if you're just trying to publish too soon, especially if you're trying to traditionally publish and nobody's picking up your book because it's not ready or you're not ready. Then you could also start to feel like you're no good, you have no good stories to tell, your writing sucks and you'll never get better, and that's the reason why you're not getting picked up for publication, etc., etc. And again, confidence shaken or completely destroyed, and you just don't want that, okay? I'm telling you right now, and I know you probably already know it, you don't want your self-confidence to go away, because as writers, sometimes that's all we have. Sometimes all we have is our confidence in ourselves, because maybe we don't have supportive family or friends or whatever telling us, yes, you're a good writer, yes, you can do this. Sometimes we have to hype ourselves up. We have to tell ourselves, you're good, you can do this, just keep moving forward, But if your confidence is completely shattered, you're not able to do that for yourself. And then likely you won't write again, or it'll take you a very, very long time to become brave enough to try again. And then not only can it be damaging to your psyche, but it can also be damaging to your career in a couple of ways. First of all, if you publish too soon and your book isn't ready, and so it isn't as good as it could be, and it's getting a ton of negative criticism, That's just bad for your business. People are going to read your book and they're not going to like it, and then the next book you come out with, even if it's 1,000,000 times better, they're automatically going to think, oh, I've already read a book by this person, it wasn't good, I'm not going to read this next book. I'm not going to give it a chance because I already know I don't like this author's stuff. So that can be very damaging to your career if you are scaring away readers with a first book that is not ready, that is not good enough to be out there yet, and yet it's out there anyway. Or it could also be damaging to your career if you personally are not ready to handle constructive criticism coming towards your book, whether it's because your book wasn't ready or just because it's the nature of the beast. You publish a book, it's going to get negative criticisms no matter how amazing it is. And if you personally are not ready to handle that, and so you are lashing out at these reviewers, you're replying to their reviews telling them that they're stupid, they don't know what they're talking about, they just don't get your book, or you're subtweeting about negative reviews and saying horrible things about these reviewers, or if you're putting out rambly, ranty YouTube videos saying that people are just not getting your book and it's so annoying and how dare they say bad things about this thing that you put your heart and soul into, that's going to negatively impact your career also, because people are going to be like, holy shit, this person's fucking nuts. Nobody likes an author who replies to negative reviews. Nobody likes an author who gets defensive of their work. Nobody likes an author who gets angry and vicious. That's not somebody people can relate to. That's not somebody people want to be around or to support. And this especially can happen if you're immature, which leads into then, how do you know if it's too soon to publish or to try to publish your book? And it all boils down to maturity, and specifically different types of maturity, which we'll talk about in a second. And now I know immediately, now that I've brought up the term maturity, a lot of the younger writers out there are going to be a little bit on edge because you think I'm talking about you. You think I'm saying because you're young, you're not mature enough, you're not ready to publish. But that's not what I'm saying, because though maturity can be construed as young people versus old people, immature young writers versus mature older writers, that's not necessarily always the case, because there are some young people who are very mature and they would be able to handle everything that goes into publishing a novel, and there are some older people who are immature and who can't handle it yet. And so it's not a case of young versus old. It's not a case of if you're a young writer, you're not ready to publish, though it does kind of lean in that direction. There are mature young people, but there is disproportionately more immature young people than mature young people, and there's disproportionately more mature older people than immature older people. But the point of this video isn't to shit on young writers. It's to help you, whether you are young or old, decide if you are mature enough and ready enough to publish your book. So now I'm going to talk about all of the different types of maturity that you need to be able to publish a book. And all of these different maturities kind of combine into an overarching, like, this is maturity. And you need to be mature in all of these different ways to be mature enough to publish a book. So the first type of maturity what you need to ask yourself is, am I mature enough to take constructive criticism? Because an immature person, a person who is not ready to publish a novel, cannot take constructive criticism, does not even seek out constructive criticism. A person who is immature will say, my book is already good enough. On this first draft that I have written, where I just kind of spewed out all my thoughts, it is already golden. There is nothing to fix. But a mature writer will say, okay, I know that there's a lot of things to fix, not even in my first draft, but maybe even my second, third, fourth, fifth drafts. I have things that I need to fix and to change, and I know that I am not a good enough writer to immediately know what all of these things are. I need outside help. I need constructive criticism. A mature writer will send their book to critique partners, beta readers, anybody who can read your book and tell you what they think is working or not working, what things they think need to be changed, or what things should totally stay the same because they're so awesome. And a mature writer not only needs to be able to take that constructive criticism and actively implement it into their book, but they also need to be able to understand, what criticism is good criticism and what is bad criticism, what is good for the book and what is bad for the book. A mature person will take the constructive criticism and then decide how to act on it, and they will know the right way to act on it. And if you're immature, if you think that constructive criticisms are attacks on you or attacks on your book instead of what they really are, which is just somebody taking the time out of their day, usually for free, to just try to help you make the best book you can. If you're too immature to not realize that's what it is, then you're not ready to publish a book. The next form of maturity that you need to be able to publish a book is the maturity to not rush the process. Because even though to you it might feel like there is a deadline, like you have to publish your book before you get out of high school or before you get out of college or before you're a certain age, that time limit does not actually exist. That is a deadline that you have put on yourself that doesn't exist and might be to your detriment. If you are rushing the process, if you are writing too fast, editing too fast, or skipping editing altogether, if you're skipping steps in the process to rush it, then you are not mature enough to publish a book. A mature person realizes that it takes as long as it takes. And a mature person realizes that every step of the process is so important and cannot be skipped or rushed. Only an immature person is going to think that they can get away with rushing the process or with skipping steps of the process, because a mature person realizes that if they do that, then their book isn't going to be as good. So an immature person thus is going to write a book that then isn't ready to publish. Another form of maturity that you need kind of bleeds into the one we just talked about, and that is you need the maturity to properly edit your book. Now this is mostly for self-published novels, because if you're traditionally publishing your novel, you have to edit it by yourself, but you don't have to pay for editing. That will come with when your book is sold to a publishing house. They will give you an editor who will help you edit your book. But if you are self-publishing, then you need multiple rounds of edits, and those are expensive. Those cost money. You need to be mature enough to be willing to pay that money to get your novel properly edited, and you need to be mature enough to obviously have that money in the first place. You would need to be mature enough to have a part-time job or a full-time job, depending on how old you are, and to have saved up money to be able to afford the editing process. Because again, a book needs multiple rounds of editing. It doesn't just need like one last line edit at the end to make sure that there's no grammatical errors or whatever. It needs at least one developmental edit, if not multiple, depending on how many structural issues your book has. It'll need at least one developmental, at least one copy edit and line edit and whatever else. Like, there's multiple rounds of editing that go into publishing a good book. And an immature person is going to think that they can skip those rounds of editing or skip certain kinds of editing. They're going to think that their writing is good enough that they don't need a developmental edit, or they're going to think their writing is good enough that they don't need a copy edit. But that's not the case. You need all of the edits no matter how good or bad of a writer you are, because an editor is trained to know how certain things need to go or be laid out to make sense to readers, and they're going to catch things that you didn't catch because you wrote it and you've read it a million times, and at this point you're probably blind to any issues that the book might have. So a mature writer would get those edits done, an immature writer would not get those edits done, and then thus their book would not be ready to be published and they would be publishing it too soon. Another form of maturity that you have to have, that is probably honestly one of the hardest forms of maturity to develop, and it's one that I had a lot of trouble developing myself, is the maturity to be able to shelve projects. And when you shelve a project, that means you're no longer working on it. You've set it aside and you've decided to work on something else. And immature writers tend to think that the one project that they're working on is so great and there's no way it'll never get published, or that it won't do well in the market, and that they just need to hyper focus on that one project. But Honestly, once you become more mature, you realize that sometimes, not always, but sometimes shelving a project is necessary, either because you started it at a time in your life where you weren't as good of a writer and now you're a better writer and you need to move on to a different project that will showcase your writing ability, or the market right now just isn't good for that project and so you're wasting time on that project, and if you put that project out into the world by self-publishing it, it might not be a good time to do so. It might be too soon. Or in the case of traditional publishing, realizing that that book, because the market is not good for it, that book will not get you an agent, it will not get you a publishing deal, but some other book that you have an idea for might get you those things. You know, it takes maturity to accept that. And I personally had so much trouble with that. But I eventually came to realize the truth of it. But an immature writer isn't going to think that way. An immature writer is going to think that this book is the book they have to write, the one they have to hyper-focus on, the one that they have to edit a million times to keep up with how much better they are becoming at writing. You know, they think, oh, I've been working on this book for 3 years, I can't give up on it now. That's the thoughts of an immature writer. A mature writer will think, okay, I spent 3 years on it, but if it's not getting me anywhere, why would I spend 3 more years on it? So you need that maturity to be able to move on. So then let's say you did have all of those different types of maturity. You were mature enough to not rush the process, to get beta readers, to get the proper edits, to maybe shelve a book and start a new one, or just to at least consider whether you should shelve your book or not. Let's say you were all of those different types of mature. So your book then most likely is ready, or as ready as you personally as the writer can get it. And so now you publish it. Either you publish it through self-publishing or you publish it through traditional publishing. Either way, it's out there in the world and it's getting critiqued. You also need to be mature enough to handle those criticisms. And if you don't think you're at that point where you could handle criticisms leveled at your book by actual book reviewers, then you're not ready to publish the book. You need to be prepared to handle the worst case scenario, which is that even though you did everything right when it came to writing your book and editing your book and publishing your book, sometimes books just aren't well received. And if that's the case with your book, and if it gets a ton of negative reviews, you need to be mature enough to be able to handle that. Or even if you write a great book and it comes out and it only gets a few negative reviews, you still need to be able to handle those as well, because no matter how great your book is, it's going to get negative reviews. But either way, you need to be mature enough to handle those criticisms with grace. You need to know if you're able to read negative reviews. Can your psyche handle that? You need to know that. You need to be mature enough to recognize if you can or cannot handle that. And if you cannot, then don't read the negative reviews. Because at this point, your book's already out. So it does you no good to read the negative reviews, because it's not like taking critiques from beta readers who are helping your book. These are critiques from people who have read your book, and these are just their thoughts on it, and you can't change the book. So if you can't handle those negative critiques, then just don't read those negative reviews. Or if you do think you can handle reading negative reviews, you need to be mature enough not to lash out, like we mentioned at the beginning of the video. You know, you can't reply to those negative reviewers and tell them that they just don't get your book. You can't comment about negative reviews on any of your social medias. You just need to read them and move on. And this isn't saying that you can't let the fact that you're getting negative reviews affect you, because it's just in our nature, you know, to feel a certain way about getting negative reviews about something that we love and that we put so much work into. But you need to be mature enough to not act on those feelings. You need to be mature enough to feel those feelings, sit on those feelings, and then let them go. And if you don't feel like you're mature enough to do that, then you're not mature enough to publish your book. And then the last form of maturity that you need is the maturity to move on to another project once your initial project has been published. And this can go one of two ways. If your book was received negatively and got a lot of negative critiques, even though you did everything right, you need to be mature enough to be able to move on to the next project and to not have your confidence shattered. Again, like we talked about at the beginning of the video. You need to be mature enough to be able to handle the negativity and to not let that completely derail you or your career. You need to be able to, again, let it go and move on to the next project and just be mature enough to think, okay, I'm just going to make this next project even better. Or on the other hand, if your book was received positively, then you can't let that get to your head and you can't let it make you think, oh, I wrote this amazing book and now I can never write another good book again. Like, this is it. This is my magnum opus and everything I write after this will be garbage, so I just might as well not write anything again, just live off of this high for the rest of my life. You can't do that either. You need to be mature enough to think, okay, I did this great, but I am an author who is always growing and always learning and always becoming even better. So my next book will be even better based on what I've learned from my successes and also maybe some of my failures in this book. So even though it was received positively, you need to recognize and be mature enough to recognize that you can still grow and that your next book will probably be even better, and that's a good thing, and you need to be able to move on. And if during this video you really listened to everything that I said, all of the different types of maturity I said you should have, and you really reflected on yourself and felt like, yes, I am mature enough to handle all of those things, then congratulations. You're ready to put your book out. It won't be too soon. However, if you reflected and thought, I don't know if I could handle that, or I don't know if I want to do all those rounds of editing, or I don't have the money to do those rounds of editing, you're not ready, and if you put your book out, it will be too soon, and it will, without a doubt, negatively impact you or your career, or maybe both, in some way. But one last thing that I will say is that even if you watched this whole video and even if you really did listen to what I had to say and reflected on what I had to say, which congratulations already means you have a certain level of maturity to be able to reflect on yourself and to recognize where you may or may not have failings as far as maturity goes. But even if you did all of that, you might still stumble, because that is the human condition. You know, you might have really listened to what I had to say and reflected on yourself and said, yes, I am that mature, but maybe your reflection was wrong. Maybe you gave yourself a little bit too much credit. And so because of that, you will stumble. That's okay. It happens. The point of this video was just to help you reflect and to help you realize how much maturity really does go into publishing. You know, it's not all fun and games. It's not just something you do because you're impatient and you love writing and you just want to put your book out there. Like, it is a serious thing. If you want to make writing a career, it is a serious thing that you really need to consider all of the different aspects of it and really decide if you are ready to take that next step. And then if you've reflected on all of this and you've decided that maybe you're not mature enough, you're not ready to publish, you might be wondering, okay, well, what do I do then? If I'm not ready to publish, what do I do? And to that I say, you write, you practice. You write and you write and you write, and you get better at the craft of writing, and you give your book to critique partners and maybe even some beta readers, and you find out where you are strong and where you are weak, both in your writing and also in your ability to handle that criticism. You practice taking criticism. You learn where your weak spots are in your writing, so maybe you're able to write something good enough where you don't need multiple rounds of edits when it comes to the point where you're ready to pay for editing for your novel. And then while you're practicing, while you're growing, work on your maturity, work on yourself, work on becoming ready to be able to handle negative reviews, to be able to handle moving on, to be able to handle all of the different steps of publishing. You just grow, you know, and especially if you're a young writer, as you get older, that maturity will hopefully naturally come. Obviously, not always, but as long as you're working on it, it will most likely come. And one last thing that I want to say is that I'm not talking out my ass here, okay? I feel like my levels of maturity have only very recently risen as I have graduated from college, and I've been kind of thrown into the real world and thrust into understanding the reality of the situation at hand. And I feel like before then, you know, even when I was in college, I was not mature enough to publish, and I'm so glad that I didn't. I considered self-publishing for a while, and I'm so thankful that I didn't, not because I think there's anything wrong with self-publishing, but because my book wasn't ready, and I wasn't ready, and I know that now. So I'm talking from experience, and I'm coming to you from experience, hoping to help you understand what could negatively happen if you put your book out too soon, and how that could hurt you in the long run. And am I saying that now I feel like I am totally mature and totally ready to publish my books? I don't know. You know, I did shelve a book, and now I'm writing new books, but they're nowhere near publishing ready, so I have time to grow in my maturity, because no, I don't think I'm 100% mature enough to publish yet, but I think that by the time these books are ready to be published, I will be ready to publish. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'm really interested to know if you agree or disagree with the points that I made in this video. Do you think I was right in what I said about maturity, or do you think that I was wrong? And if so, let me know what you personally think about all of this. Like, I'm very interested to know other people's thoughts. And if you did enjoy this video, you know what to do. Other than leaving a comment, there's a like button, subscribe button, so do what you're feeling. And thank you again so much for watching this video. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!